Hello, Internet. Today we're talking about one of the strangest twists in online history since Sonic kissed a human woman. Game theory has entered the United States Congress, and no, this isn't a satire, and no, you haven't slipped into a Five Nights at Freddy's themed fever dream. MatPat, yes, that MatPat, the YouTube game theorist, just launched an actual congressional caucus. It's called the Creator Economy Caucus, and according to the glowing press releases, LinkedIn humble brags, and overly friendly tech write-ups, this thing is supposed to give content creators a voice in Washington, D.C., which sounds amazing, right? At first glance, it really does. After all, creators have spent years being treated like hobbyists with webcams, chewed up by algorithms, demonetized without warning, and forced to navigate ever-shifting platform rules written by people who still think TikTok is the sound that a clock makes. And finally, we're told, someone's standing up for us. The caucus promises to tackle our biggest headaches: unclear tax obligations, algorithmic instability, and a total lack of business support for the thousands of creators trying to survive in an industry built on chaos. And best of all, it's supposedly bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans hand in hand fighting for the little guy on the internet. Yay! Sunshine, flowers, and kisses for all. Except, and there's always a but, isn't there? Once you stop bathing in the feel-good headlines and start actually looking at the structure, the people involved, and the gaping black hole where transparency should be, well, it stops looking like a victory and like something else completely, because this caucus, it's not made up of everyday creators. It's being shaped by platform-friendly millionaires, backed by corporate policy teams, and co-chaired by lawmakers. And MatPat, the man who once called himself a voice for creators, is right there at the center of it. So, with this context in mind, today we're digging deeper, past the press fluff, past the PR spin, past the Reddit threads and LinkedIn photo ops, and we're asking, who's actually pulling the strings? Who really stands to gain from this? And most importantly, looking at the glaring gaps in transparency that surround this entire operation. This isn't just a case of game theory going to Washington, it's a case of MatPat's political power grab, one dressed in creator-friendly branding but built on contradictions, corporate partnerships, and silence where visibility should be. So, buckle in. This one's got everything: power, politics, hypocrisy, and yes, probably an algorithm or two. So once again, hello, Internet. Welcome to Lady Decade. It's time to discuss MatPat's pivot towards politics. But is it for creators like you or his cronies? No matter where you stand politically, so left, right, centre, or just hiding from it all in the Steam backlog, one thing unites us all. We're gamers, and we like our games cheap. So right now you can grab 43% off Expedition 33, 37% off Black Myth Wukong, 29% off Stellar Blade, and 32% off the stunning Wu Chang Fallen Feathers. All through my discount links below. There are thousands of retro and modern games that are currently up to 90% off. So whether you're curating your forever library or panic buying before another purge, don't pay full price like a muppet. Click the pinned comment, build your collection, and enjoy the games you actually want while you still can. Happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. To understand the real dynamics behind this caucus, or what it's even supposed to be for, we need to talk about its most recognisable figure, MatPat himself, or more formally, Matthew Patrick. If you've spent any time on YouTube over the last decade, you've almost certainly encountered at least one of his videos. He's the founder and host of Game Theory, which ballooned into a media empire spanning film theory, food theory, and style theory, collectively pulling in tens of millions of subscribers and billions of views. For many, he became the friendly face of high-effort YouTube analysis, a sort of digital schoolteacher meets a showman hybrid who could turn Mario Law into an economics lecture. But, of course, to achieve this level of success, MatPat wasn't just a performer. Behind the scenes, he was a savvy businessman. He understood early on that success on YouTube wasn't just about passion or creativity, it was about optimization. MatPat mastered the algorithm before most creators even knew it existed. His videos were meticulously structured to maximize watch time, click-through rates, and advertiser appeal. Thumbnail theory, he practically pioneered it. SEO manipulation, built into the DNA of every Just a Theory tagline. And it worked. In 2022, MatPat and his wife Stephanie sold their production company Theorists Media to Luna X, a media investment firm backed by serious capital. The final sale price was never disclosed, but considering the brand's massive reach and its team of over 20 full-time employees, it almost certainly netted them millions, on top of the massive fortune they'd already amassed. The YouTube theorist had officially leveled up, no longer just a content creator, but a fully fledged media mogul. But instead of riding off into a golden algorithmic sunset, MatPat pivoted not into obscurity, but into reinvention. In March 2024, he officially stepped away from content creation, not to retire fully as such, but to rebrand. No longer the cheerful narrator of game theory, he emerged as something far more strategic, a political operator, a policy advocate, a self-appointed spokesperson for the entire creator economy. And make no mistake, this wasn't a sudden career twist. The groundwork had been laid long before the cameras stopped rolling. You see, long before the Caucus launched, MatPat and Stephanie were quietly lobbying on Capitol Hill, meeting with lawmakers, building relationships, positioning themselves as the voices of a digital industry that, for all its cultural power, still lacked formal recognition in Washington. So, the game theory couple did what they've always done best. They spotted an untapped niche, packaged it in accessible language, and inserted themselves at the center of the conversation. Except this time, instead of breaking down Mario's tax returns or theorizing about FNAF timelines, they were creating a new narrative entirely, one where they weren't just creators, but political pioneers. Now, if all you knew was the surface-level success story, that might sound inspiring. A YouTuber builds an empire, cashes out, and reinvests their influence to make life better for creators everywhere. But for many long-time viewers, MatPat's story has always been a little bit more complicated than that. You see, much like all of us, especially those who have spent years navigating the increasingly polarized world of online culture, MatPat isn't a universally beloved figure. Far from it, really. Yes, he commands a massive fan base, and yes, his content is slick, well-produced and algorithmically engineered to appeal to the widest possible audience. And yes, he's undeniably smart, a capable presenter, a meticulous editor, and a shrewd businessman who understands the mechanics of digital media better than most. But admiration isn't the whole story, because for every subscriber who sees him as the clever, affable face of educational gaming content, there's another viewer who sees something altogether different. A calculated opportunist, a brand masquerading as a person, and a content creator whose every word feels scrubbed, rehearsed, and optimized for brand safety above authenticity. And those detractors, they're not just frothing trolls in your average Twitter reply section. Many are former fans, people who once adored his work but slowly began to notice a pattern that beneath the friendly "hello internet" and faux curious tone lies a formula. A formula built less on genuine curiosity and more on SEO, click-through rates, and Google Trends. They noticed how often he'd leap onto trending topics with the same rehearsed cadence, offering surface-level insights dressed up as profound theory. They saw how his thumbnails became more exaggerated, how his titles became more baited, and how his channel, once a place for offbeat gaming speculation, began to resemble a corporate media product polished to the point of sterility. Others criticised how he handles controversy, namely by trying not to. MatPat's career has largely been defined by careful neutrality, rarely taking a stance unless it's safe or socially expedient to do so. And when he has entered the fray, as he did during the infamous Five Nights at Freddy's political donation controversy, it only deepened the divide. The Five Nights at Freddy's political donation controversy exploded in June 2021 when fans discovered that Scott Cawthon, the series' famously reclusive creator, had donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to several high-profile Republican politicians. For many fans, particularly LGBTQ+ players and content creators who had helped make FNAF the cultural phenomenon it became, fairly or not, this felt like a betrayal to them. The timing didn't help. The donations resurfaced during Pride Month, a period when many fans were already perceiving there to be an ongoing erosion of LGBTQ+ protections in the US. Cawthon's response only escalated tensions. Rather than apologise, he issued a Reddit statement doubling down on his political choices. He said that he was proud of his donations, that he wouldn't apologise for supporting candidates he believed in, and that he didn't see them as anti-LGBTQ+. He then abruptly announced his retirement from game development, framing it as a decision made in the face of cancel culture. Enter MatPat. As one of Scott Cawthon's most prominent supporters, someone who built an entire wing of his game theory empire off dissecting FNAF lore, many fans looked to him for some kind of response, and eventually he gave one. While MatPat never directly condemned or endorsed Scott's actions, he released a now notorious video titled Game Theory, We Need to Talk About FNAF. He addressed the controversy in that signature MatPat way, cautious, sentimental and full of vague moralising appeals to empathy. Rather than take a firm stance, he urged fans to consider the complexity of the situation, to avoid knee-jerk judgments and to see the bigger picture, one in which, he argued, the American two-party system offers limited options and political donations don't always reflect the moral character of the donor. Despite openly identifying as an LGBTQ+ ally, MatPat explained that he would continue to support FNAF, pointing to his own background as a theatre kid who had always been surrounded by LGBTQ+ people, and the diversity of both his own team and the FNAF development team. In his view, the ongoing success of the franchise benefited many marginalised voices, including those who helped build the brand behind the scenes. The implication was clear. While Scott's donations may have upset some fans, the broader FNAF ecosystem was still a net positive and, therefore, worth defending. To some, it was a mature, measured take, one that tried to cool the temperature of an increasingly volatile situation, but to others, especially LGBTQ+ fans, it felt like a cop-out, a performative show of neutrality designed to protect MatPat's brand and avoid taking a real stance. For a creator who presented himself as an ally, to some it came off as disingenuous, as if solidarity only mattered when it didn't come at a cost. And this really is the through line in MatPat's career. His critics don't accuse him of being malicious, they accuse him of being too careful, too PR conscious, too unwilling to upset the algorithm or the status quo. He's built an empire on balancing the tightrope between audience goodwill and corporate safety, and when real-world issues bleed into his digital sandbox, he tends to back away slowly, hoping his audience will let him stay in the middle, and sometimes they do. But in this case, many didn't. The central tension that's dogged MatPat for years is the sense that MatPat's ultimate loyalty isn't to any particular community, cause or principle, but to the continued smooth operation of MatPat Incorporated. That he has always been more interested in preserving the image of being everyone's thoughtful internet uncle. And this wouldn't matter much, except now he's no longer just analysing games. Apparently, he's going to be helping shape legislation. He's sitting down with lawmakers and positioning himself as a political intermediary for millions of creators across the globe. And suddenly, the same criticisms that used to apply to his videos now apply to something far more consequential, because if the person claiming to represent creators in Washington has spent a decade fine-tuning their ability to look sincere without ever really rocking the boat, then maybe just maybe the boat was never meant to be rocked at all. A few years after the Scott Cawthon controversy, MatPat has publicly partnered with Representative Beth Van Dyne, a politician who literally voted to overturn the 2020 election results and has a well-documented history of voting against LGBTQ+ rights. This disconnect has led many fans to question whether MatPat's public persona, thoughtful, inclusive and humble, was ever truly sincere or simply just the most marketable version of himself. And to be fair, he wouldn't be the first YouTuber to master the art of brand over substance. But to his credit, this move does line up with some of the broader values he expressed in the Scott Cawthon video though, particularly his belief that the world shouldn't be reduced to red versus blue politics and that real life is often far more nuanced than the party lines suggest. But even if we give him the benefit of the doubt, even if we assume he's being sincere in his current efforts, the fact remains that MatPat's position is not at all representative of the average content creator. Unlike the thousands of smaller content creators struggling to make rent from their Patreon or watching their ad revenue vanish after an algorithm tweak, MatPat's channels have always played well with the system. He's never been shadow banned, never demonetized for talking about taboo topics, never had to fight with YouTube support for reinstatement. His content is algorithm catnip. It's advertiser-friendly, neatly edited, educationally framed, and never rocking the boat too much. And now, after a lucrative company sale and a clean retirement, he's taken that wealth and platform goodwill and converted it into political influence. He's officially registered as a lobbyist with financial resources, name recognition, and corporate connections that the average creator could only dream of. So when MatPat says he's fighting for the rights of creators, we have to ask, which creators exactly? His experience diverges sharply from those dealing with content moderation bias, income instability, or a lack of access to legal protections. And while he may have a deep understanding of the industry's mechanics, that doesn't automatically mean he understands or can represent the lived reality of creators operating outside the algorithmic spotlight. And that's the key point here. MatPat isn't just another creator advocating for his peers. He's a multi-millionaire content mogul turned political insider. And while his involvement brings visibility and influence, it also risks reinforcing the same elite-driven, corporate-aligned systems that have long excluded the very creators most in need of support. So, let's take a step back. What exactly is a congressional caucus? As for many who live outside of the US, like myself, we need to take a moment to get our heads around this political jargon. Well, if a caucus isn't some formal branch of government, it's more like an unofficial club within Congress. Think of it as a group of lawmakers who've decided to work together on a shared area of interest. There are caucuses for everything from environmental policy to video games to chicken farming. No, seriously. And while they don't pass laws directly, they're influential in shaping the legislation that does. Caucuses operate behind the scenes. They help set policy agendas, educate other members of Congress, and lobby for specific outcomes. The members aren't paid for being in them, and there's no official budget, but they can attract resources, sometimes from private donors and sometimes from corporate sponsors, and often in the form of so-called educational materials, event hosting, and staff support, all of which sounds harmless enough, until you realise that there are very few rules about disclosing where that money and support actually comes from. Which brings us to the so-called Creator Economy Caucus. This new caucus, launched in June 2025, is co-chaired by two representatives, Democrat Yvette Clarke of New York and Republican Beth Van Dyne of Texas. Between them, they're supposedly leading a group of around 10 House members, although curiously, only the names of those two chairs have been publicly disclosed. The rest is still a mystery. As for the caucus's goals, they're broad and they sound really nice on paper. They want to push for clearer tax classifications for creators, which many of us know is long overdue. They want content creators to be legally recognised as real businesses and to have access to things like small business loans. And they want platforms like YouTube to be more transparent about how their algorithms work, especially when sudden changes can completely wreck someone's income without warning. If that's all they did, if this caucus existed simply to improve working conditions and offer protection for creators, there'd be little to criticise. But problems begin to arise when we start to take a closer look at how these groups actually function. And the harder we begin to look, the more you will start to see the gaps. The lack of transparency, the reliance on undisclosed funding, and the overwhelming involvement of corporate representatives who may have a very different idea of what creator advocacy should look like. And with only 2 names out of 10 revealed, no independent funding disclosures, and an unusual amount of corporate praise already being heaped on the caucus from platforms like YouTube and Patreon, it's fair to ask whether this really is a neutral group working in public interest or just another lobbying vessel disguised as creator support. Now we know what a caucus is and what it says it wants to do, let's take a look at the people running the show, because who's involved tells us a lot about who's likely to benefit. We'll start with the 2 congressional co-chairs of the Creator Economy Caucus, Representatives Yvette Clarke and Beth Van Dine. On paper, they form a bipartisan duo, but in reality, they represent 2 very different corners of the political spectrum, and the alliance raises more questions than it does answers. Clarke represents parts of Brooklyn and currently serves as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Her voting record is reliably progressive, supporting expanded social programs, online privacy reform, civil rights protections, and economic investment in underserved communities. Her district was once represented by Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman elected to Congress, and Clarke often positions herself in that legacy of advocacy and representation. She's also no stranger to digital issues. Over the years, Clarke has championed data privacy legislation and online safety measures, especially for vulnerable communities. If you're going to include a Democrat in a digital rights caucus, she's a sensible choice. Her policy interests align, at least on the surface, with the goal of creating a more equitable and accountable digital environment. Her record, however, is not without its detractors. Critics on the left argue that her long tenure in office hasn't always translated into meaningful reform, and some accuse her of aligning with establishment interests more often than her progressive branding suggests. Others feel her leadership has been slow to address the evolving challenges of tech regulation, despite her stated commitment to the issue. If you look at her appointment through that lens, then she seems less like a sensible choice and instead a more dubious one. Her Republican counterpart, Beth Van Dine, represents Texas's 24th district. She's best known for her alignment with Trump-era conservatism and has earned an 87% rating from Heritage Action, reflecting a strong commitment to right-wing economic and social policy. For those outside of the US like me who have no idea what Heritage Action is, it's a political advocacy group that rates lawmakers based on how closely their voting record aligns with traditional conservative principles such as limited government, free markets, and national security. Basically, Beth Van Dine supporters view her as a staunch advocate for limited government and free enterprise with a track record of prioritising local control and national security. But Van Dine also comes with her own share of criticism. She drew widespread attention and pushback for voting to object to the certification of Pennsylvania's electoral votes in the 2020 presidential election, a decision that placed her in the orbit of the post-election controversy. She later opposed the formation of an independent commission to investigate the January 6 Capitol riot, a stance that further polarised opinion. In short, both co-chairs bring considerable political experience to the table, but also a degree of ideological baggage. Each has a distinct policy outlook, a loyal base of supporters, and a history of decisions that have drawn legitimate criticism. And while that doesn't disqualify them from leading a caucus, it does raise important questions about whose voices will ultimately be centred and whose might be left out. So when you see a caucus being marketed as bipartisan, but notice that its leadership consists of two deeply partisan co-chairs, you have to stop and ask, what does bipartisan really mean in this context? Because it's not necessarily a synonym for balanced. More often, it's political window dressing, a way to lend an initiative a veneer of legitimacy by placing a Republican and a Democrat side by side, even if their underlying values couldn't be more opposed. And that speaks to a broader concern that the Creator Economy Caucus isn't a grassroots movement at all. It's not an organic push for structural reform or creator empowerment. It's a carefully curated alliance of political operators, brand-safe creators, and corporate representatives. A mechanism not designed to fix the creator economy, but to formalize and preserve its most unequal aspects in ways that serve the platforms, protect lobbyists, and shield elite creators who already enjoy privileged access to power. So, with that said, let's dig a little deeper. Of course, no discussion of this caucus is complete without looking at the faces behind it, not just the politicians, but the creators actively shaping it. And at the centre of it all are Matthew and Stephanie Patrick, who are not just affiliated with the caucus, but deeply involved in its creation, promotion, and strategic direction. So let's take a closer look at how they've positioned themselves at the heart of this initiative. Let's start with MatPat himself. Officially, he is now listed as a registered lobbyist for the creator economy, a role that might surprise long-term fans who still associate him with Mario murder mysteries and Five Nights at Freddy's lore breakdowns. And thanks to the multi-million-dollar sale of Theorist Media in 2022, he's financially independent, free to move in political circles without the constraints that most working creators face. In theory, a game theory, that kind of transition could be a huge win for the creator community. Who better to advocate for us than someone who's built a career from the ground up, who's likely wrestled with copyright claims and content ID systems? Except MatPat didn't really struggle his way through any of that. His content has always played by the rules. It's neat, it's inoffensive, and perfectly tailored to YouTube's ever-changing guidelines. He never had to worry about getting demonetized for covering controversial topics or being shadow banned for speaking out. Algorithmic punishments, irrelevant to him. He's never had to chase appeal emails or survive on scraps between brand deals. His version of the creator experience is more boardroom than bedroom. A world of media consultants, strategic partnerships, and corporate synergy. In short, MatPat doesn't represent the average creator. If anything, he's become the blueprint for how to build a content empire without ever having to feel what it's like to be on the outside of the system. But, of course, MatPat has not been alone through all of this. Stephanie Patrick, co-founder of Theorist Media and MatPat's wife, has also been heavily involved in launching the caucus. She's confirmed the initiative on LinkedIn, been spotted at the events, and by all accounts has played a significant role in organising the entire push. That matters because she isn't just a supportive spouse, she's a stakeholder. As MatPat's business partner, she also stands to benefit from the success of this caucus, especially if it helps to build a new professional identity for the pair post-YouTube. Together, the Patricks form a kind of political power couple for the creator economy, a duo with money, media influence, and a growing network of allies both inside Congress and Silicon Valley. And while that might sound impressive, it also reinforces the central concern. This caucus is being shaped not by struggling creators, not by marginalized voices, and certainly not by anyone reliant on platform scraps, but by two of the wealthiest, most platform-friendly figures figures in the industry. So the question isn't whether MatPat and Stephanie know the creator economy. Of course they bloody do. The question is whether they can actually represent it, or whether their version of creator advocacy is just a continuation of the same top-down corporate aligned culture that got us into this mess in the first place. Now, let's turn our attention to the other creators who have directly participated in this caucus or had their teams involved in shaping its early image, because once again, we're not seeing a cross-section of the average creator economy. What we're seeing is a very specific, very polished tier of elite representation. So let's start with Pokimane. As one of the most recognizable faces on Twitch, Pokimane has built a reputation for being approachable, relatable, and largely apolitical in her persona. She's been very careful, deliberately so, to avoid overtly partisan statements, preferring to focus on community, lifestyle, and occasional creator drama. She was physically present at the launch event and is clearly being positioned as a sort of mainstream ambassador for the gaming and streaming community. But while she certainly represents gaming, she does so from an incredibly privileged position. Pokimane is not an everyday creator struggling with monetization thresholds or unfair bans. She's a multi-millionaire with management, legal support, and brand partnerships with some of the most powerful companies in tech and fashion. Her involvement might bring star power, but it doesn't bring a grassroots perspective. Then there's Katie Morton, a licensed therapist with over 1 million YouTube subscribers, known for her mental health content. She's a published author and frequently appears in media discussing therapy, online well-being, and mental health trends. Politically, she leans progressive, often framing therapy as a form of social awareness, which may explain why she was invited. She brings legitimacy to the educational side of content creation, particularly in an era where online misinformation has made mental health an increasingly politicized topic. But again, we're talking about someone whose entire channel is platform safe by design. Katie Morton's videos are crafted to be advertiser friendly, aligned with YouTube's health guidelines, and are free from the sort of moderation issues that plague smaller, more controversial voices in the mental health space. Then we have Mark Rober, or rather, Mark Rober's team. The former NASA engineer turned YouTuber is one of the platform's most celebrated science communicators, known for his engineering stunts and viral educational content. He didn't attend the launch event himself, but his team did, which tells you everything you need to know about his brand tier. Rober operates more like a small media company than a solo creator, and his presence signals how STEM creators are being included in this initiative, not as individual voices, but as polished brands with built-in credibility. As you can see, a clear pattern is emerging here. Then there's John Regalado, former creative director at Jubilee Media and host of the Radical Empathy podcast. Regalado played a key role in expanding Jubilee's reach from a niche project into an 8 million subscriber behemoth. He specializes in what might be called structured discourse, those highly produced videos where strangers with opposing views have moderated conversations in clean white rooms. Jubilee has always walked the line between content and political theatre, framing itself as neutral while subtly pushing progressive ideals through empathy-driven media. So Regalado's involvement makes sense. He brings experience in political messaging, content curation, and audience engagement through highly produced debate formats. He doesn't represent the rough and tumble reality of most creators, but rather the managed, scripted version of authenticity that platforms love to highlight. Taken together, these names paint a clear picture. This isn't a caucus built around the diverse, chaotic, and often marginalized reality of the broader creator economy. It's a caucus showcasing creators who are already institutionally safe, brand-friendly, and often backed by corporate management. These are people who already have platform relationships, PR teams, and financial cushions, not the struggling educational channel, the banned activist, or the gaming streamer who got demonetized for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And what kind of creators are glaringly absent? Yeah, anyone who publicly leans to the right or whose content doesn't align with the prevailing cultural consensus of Silicon Valley. In short, these attendees don't challenge the system, they validate it, and are all likely hungry for more money and power like they have all been chasing for their entire periods online. So if this caucus is claiming to represent creators but only includes those who are least likely to face the real risks of platform dependency and policy overreach, then it's fair to ask whether it's really advocacy at all or just a glossy form of reputation laundering for platforms and their preferred partners. And now we get to the part that should raise the biggest red flags of all: the corporate power players. While the Creator Economy Caucus presents itself as an organic alliance between politicians and creators, it just so happens to include some very high-ranking representatives from the two most powerful platforms in the entire digital creator ecosystem: YouTube and Patreon. Let's begin with Alexandra Veach. She is YouTube's Senior Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy. In other words, she's the one who makes sure that YouTube's interests are heard in the halls of Congress. Before that, she was a special assistant to President Obama and served as senior staff to Nancy Pelosi. She has a long pedigree in establishment Democratic politics, and in 2023, she was named one of Washington, D.C.'s 500 most influential people. Not creators, people. And now she's here smiling for photos at a creator rights caucus, as if she represents the same group as the rest of us. Let's be absolutely clear, Veach is not there to advocate for the creators. She's there to ensure that any legislation aimed at regulating YouTube, whether that's around algorithms, revenue sharing, moderation, or privacy, aligns with YouTube's business model. It's not personal, it's her job. Then there's Courtney Duffy from Patreon, another executive who doesn't just support the caucus quietly, but has actively helped shape it. On LinkedIn, she proudly states that Patreon has been proud to work with the offices of Representative Clark and Representative Van Dyne on this initiative. Translation: they're not just observing, they're involved. Duffy is the head of external affairs and strategic engagement at Patreon, which is corporate speak for in charge of lobbying and public image. Her resume includes a Harvard Kennedy School MPA, a Dartmouth MBA, and a stint on Facebook's economic policy team, you know, the folks who helped decide how creators get paid and what platforms can extract from them. Her profile also includes a standard helping of ESG-friendly buzzwords, pledging herself to an equitable, inclusive, and sustainable world. Here's the rub. That's exactly what makes this so slippery. The branding is progressive. The messaging is feel good, and the partnerships are dressed up as creator empowerment, but at its core, this is about platforms influencing regulation under the banner of advocacy. Because YouTube and Patreon aren't there to challenge the system, they are the system. They're the intermediaries who siphon off revenue, enforce opaque guidelines, and decide who gets discovered and who gets buried. Their presence here isn't proof that creators are finally being heard. It's proof that the platforms have no intention of letting creators speak for themselves. What we're watching isn't grassroots. It's not creator-led. It's a textbook case of regulatory capture where the very industries meant to be held accountable are shaping the rules they'll be held to. So when you see YouTube's lead policy director and Patreon's public affairs chief standing shoulder to shoulder with MatPat and a couple of friendly lawmakers, you should ask yourself a very simple question. If this really were a movement designed to protect creators from platform overreach, why are the platforms already inside the tent? Now that we've looked at who's involved, it's time to ask the next obvious question. Why is MatPat doing this? Officially, his reasons are straightforward, even admirable. He says that he's fighting for creative rights, that he wants digital creators to be recognised as legitimate businesses, that he's trying to educate lawmakers who still confuse Twitch with Twitter and think Mr. Beast is some kind of Pokemon. And to his credit, there's clearly a need for that kind of education, especially when members of Congress are asking things like, what's Roku? And how's it different from YouTube? He's also framed the caucus as bipartisan, a chance for lawmakers from both parties to come together and find common ground in supporting creators, many of whom now run businesses, employ staff, and contribute significantly to the economy. And again, on paper, that sounds great. The messaging here is crystal clear. MatPat wants us to see him as a grassroots champion, someone who built his career on YouTube, made it to the top, and is now using that success to give back to the community. The narrative is one of selfless retirement, stepping away from fame and clicks to focus on advocacy for the next generation. But let's not pretend there's no strategy involved, because if you dig a little deeper, a more complicated and more calculated picture starts to emerge. For one, this move gives MatPat an extraordinary degree of political access. It builds connections in Washington, raises his profile beyond YouTube, and potentially sets him up for an entirely new career, one where he isn't just an ex-creator, but a recognized name in policy circles. Whether that's leading a foundation, joining a think tank, or even running for office one day, the groundwork is being laid. Then there's the corporate angle. As we've already seen, this caucus isn't just about creators, it's about platforms. YouTube, Patreon, and other industry players are deeply embedded in the process, and by positioning himself as the go-between, the creator who speaks fluent Washington, MatPat becomes the ideal mouthpiece for platform-friendly reforms. He gives these companies a human face, a trusted persona, and a veneer of neutrality they could never manufacture on their own. It's also worth noting that every policy currently being mentioned by the caucus disproportionately benefits established, wealthy creators, not the thousands of small creators scraping by or being actively suppressed by algorithmic bias. Launching a bipartisan creator-focused caucus in Congress is frankly a brilliant PR move. It reframes him as serious, altruistic, and forward-thinking. Someone who's graduated from YouTube, not just quit it. So yes, maybe MatPat genuinely believes in the work he's doing. I'm sure he does. Maybe he really does want to protect creators. Again, I'm sure he does. But even if that's true, we still have to recognize what else this initiative achieves: political positioning, corporate cooperation, elite shielding, and personal rebranding. It's not cynical to notice that. It's just realistic. But there's another layer to MatPat's political pivot that becomes clearer when you revisit his own psychological admissions. In a 2020 video titled "I'm Losing Control," MatPat revealed that a 2006 terrorist plot coinciding with his flight from London triggered years of obsessive behaviour, compulsively researching plane models, checking turbulence forecasts, even rifling through airplane bathroom bins. It was all, in his own words, an attempt to control variables that were fundamentally uncontrollable. He described it as a coping mechanism, not just for air travel, but for life itself, extending to everything from study habits to fantasies of owning his own jet, just so he could choose the make, the pilot, and the passengers. This isn't just quirky perfectionism, it's a textbook case of obsessive control. And now, those same compulsions seem to be playing out in how the creator economy caucus is structured. Instead of empowering grassroots voices, MatPat has, once again, placed himself in the position of choosing the pilot, handpicking co-chairs, selecting the advisory circle, and ensuring that everyone on board the so-called advocacy plane is platform safe and brand aligned. What looks like leadership may in reality be a meticulously constructed coping strategy, one that creates the illusion of order in an industry defined by chaos. MatPat likes to frame the 2006 event as a kind of supervillain origin story, the moment that birthed his obsession with controlling every variable. But the truth is likely far more mundane. People rarely develop control issues from a single incident. They're revealed by them. His obsession with mastering YouTube algorithms, thumbnail theory, and the very psychology of watch time wasn't a pivot. It was always there. The plane incident simply made him self-aware of what had long been a core part of his identity, and that's what makes this all the more concerning, because MatPat didn't overcome those issues like he claimed in that video. He capitalized on them. He turned compulsive control into a career strategy, and now he's doing the same with creator advocacy. What we're seeing isn't a community movement, it's a closed cockpit run by a man who feels safest when he knows every lever, every seatbelt, and every passenger by name. Looking at the bigger picture, it's hard to see this as a purely altruistic endeavour. It looks far more like an extension of his need to control the narrative at every level, especially when the people involved and the people not involved tell a very different story from the press releases. But we haven't even got around to discussing the biggest question marks surrounding this caucus as of yet, so let's hop on it. Now, look, if there's one issue that should concern everyone watching this caucus unfold, whether you're a creator, a fan, or just someone who cares about how tech and politics intersect, it's this. We don't know who's paying for any of this, and in Washington, that's rarely a good sign. You see, unlike traditional lobbying operations where organizations must disclose who is funding what, congressional caucuses fall into a grey area. They're informal by design. There's no official budget, no mandatory transparency, and no requirement to publish who's covering the costs of events, staff time, research materials, or policy proposals, which means we have no idea who is financially backing the Creator Economy Caucus or what those backers are expecting in return. What we do know is this. Both YouTube and Patreon had top executives present at the launch event, talking about the value of the creator economy, the need for legislative collaboration, and how important it is to support this growing sector. What they didn't say was what, if anything, their companies are contributing. Are they providing in-kind support like venue access, event planning, or policy research? Are they funding white papers or giving the congressional staff their expert input? Are they helping draft the legislation that could one day regulate their own business models? Because here's the thing, they don't have to tell us. And that alone should make you pause. For YouTube, the motivation for them to back this caucus is obvious. They take 45% of ad revenue from every monetized video on the platform. That's a staggering share, especially when you consider the overhead is mostly borne by creators. YouTube benefits enormously from maintaining the status quo, vague policies, opaque algorithms, and creators who are just regulated enough to be stable but never powerful enough to demand real ownership. A caucus that provides regulatory certainty without actual accountability is perfect for them. It makes lawmakers feel like progress is being made while ensuring that the platform keeps full control over its systems. Then there's Patreon, a platform that's positioned itself as the ethical alternative to ad revenue. But make no mistake, there's still an intermediary, and intermediaries always want one thing: to be enshrined in law. If Patreon can help write the rules around creator monetization, it can ensure its subscription-based model is prioritized. They can get the legal recognition, the regulatory protections, and continue taking their cuts without facing the same scrutiny as the larger tech firms. Even Jubilee Media, whose former creative director John Regalado is now involved with the caucus, has something to gain. Jubilee doesn't just make content, it makes political content. It's a company built on controversy, narrative framing, and corporate partnerships. The bigger the creator economy grows, the more opportunities there are for politically branded media projects to position themselves as the voice of the culture. Their business model thrives in this kind of policy theatre, and this pattern is nothing new. In fact, this is how lobbying has always worked. Industries fund advocacy not out of generosity, but because it gives them a seat at the table where the rules are written. Whether it's big pharma, oil companies, or the gambling industry, the logic is always the same. If regulation is coming, better to help write it than be subjected to it. And while we have no evidence regarding whether YouTube and Patreon are funding anything, we do know that they have representatives directly involved with this caucus. They're inserting themselves into the legislative process not because they want to help creators, but because they are the infrastructure of the creator economy, and any law passed about that economy affects them first. So no, we don't know exactly who is paying for this caucus. But we do know who's benefiting, and it isn't the creator struggling to hit monetization thresholds, or the channel banned with no appeal, or the educator trying to navigate copyright claims from legacy publishers. It's the platforms. It's the power brokers. It's the people who already make millions of dollars from creators and now want to help decide how we're governed too. One of the most heavily marketed aspects of the Creator Economy Caucus is that it's bipartisan, a rare moment of unity in a deeply divided political landscape. A noble effort, we're told, to bring lawmakers from both parties together for the good of the internet economy. We have already discussed the pretty wide ideological gap between its co-chairs, but when we zoom in on the creators involved, here the so-called bipartisan balance disappears entirely. MatPat and Stephanie both publicly align with centre-left values. They've spoken in support of LGBTQ+ rights, emphasised the importance of inclusion. Katie Morton, the therapist and content creator who attended the launch, frequently discusses mental health in the context of progressive cultural shifts, often framing therapy as political engagement. Pokimane, though publicly apolitical, operates within the Twitch ecosystem, a space that culturally leans heavily left. And Jubilee's former creative director, John Regalado, helped shape a platform defined by structured empathy debates and progressive-style political framing. His podcast is literally called Radical Empathy, not exactly a red state slogan. So, at the creator level, this initiative is overwhelmingly liberal, not because of some grand conspiracy, but simply because the kinds of creators who get elevated to the political stage tend to already align with the platform's values. And platform values, by and large, mirror the politics of the corporate branding behind them, which brings us neatly to the corporate layer. Alexandra Veach, representing YouTube, she's textbook democratic establishment, and Courtney Duffy from Patreon, she's got a Harvard Kennedy School policy degree, a resume that includes Facebook's economic policy team, and a LinkedIn profile full of phrases like equity, inclusion, and sustainability. Again, nothing wrong with any of that in isolation, but let's not pretend this is a neutral playing field. The only person involved who doesn't neatly fit this progressive mold is Beth Van Dyne, and she isn't even a creator, so why bring her into the mix at all? Because she's useful, because she chairs the House Subcommittee on Economic Growth, because her presence allows the caucus to call itself bipartisan while continuing to function as a progressive corporate alliance in everything but name. Her involvement gives the project institutional cover, not ideological balance. This is the problem with bipartisanship as branding. It suggests ideological diversity where none exists. It paints over contradictions with political theatre, and it allows initiatives like this one to deflect criticism by pointing at the one token Republican and saying, see, we're not political. But if almost every creator involved leans liberal, every corporate stakeholder comes from a progressive policy background, and the platform values being defended all align with a specific side of the cultural aisle, then you can't claim neutrality just because you found one Republican who was willing to smile for the camera. So now that we've looked at the structure, the players, and the branding of bipartisanship, it's time to ask the big question. Who's actually set to benefit from this Creator Economy Caucus? Because while the PR spins insists that this is all about helping creators, supporting innovation, and protecting free expression, when you follow the incentives and, more importantly, the outcomes, the real winners look very different. Let's start with the platforms. YouTube, represented by Alexandra Veach, isn't looking for accountability, just predictability. It wants stable laws that won't interfere with its algorithms, its ads, or revenue models. By joining the caucus early, YouTube makes sure that any future rules benefit the platform first. Patreon is doing the same. It brands itself as the ethical choice for creators, but is still a middleman, and middlemen want protection, not disruption. By shaping payments regulation, Patreon secures its position as the go-to platform, keeping its cut and control intact. Now, for the creators, or at least the elite few involved, MatPat already sold his company for millions and has nothing to lose. Any policy that treats creators as formal businesses only makes his empire stronger. Pokemon benefits too. She's brand safe, established, and thrives in systems built on stability. Mark Rober, though not at the launch himself, sent his team. His science content fits perfectly with government-friendly messaging and public-private media deals. None of this is illegal or shocking, but it shows exactly who this caucus is really designed to support. As of now, we're also seeing an emerging industry of corporate lawyers and consultants circling the creator economy like it's the next healthcare or energy sector. As soon as legislation becomes part of the picture, so do billable hours, so do retainers, and so does a whole cottage industry of advisors ready to help the creator class navigate the very policies they helped draft. And surprise, surprise, they won't be offering those services for free to your average Let's Player with a busted mic and a Patreon that earns 11 quid a month. And that brings us to the part that no one in Washington or Silicon Valley want to talk about. What about everyone else? According to data from Linktree, around 48% of full-time creators earn under $15,000 a year. That's below minimum wage in most developed countries. These aren't YouTube millionaires or Twitch celebrities, they're freelancers, artists, educators, and entertainers trying to make a living in an ecosystem that constantly shifts the goalposts. They don't have lawyers. They don't have agents. They certainly don't have access to congressional staffers. Many are part of communities that already face algorithmic bias, from demonetization to shadow banning to being excluded from discoverability altogether. And when they're hit by a policy change or a terms of service update, there's no warning, no support, no recourse. These are the people who need advocacy the most, and they're nowhere to be found in this caucus. They're not here because no one invited them. Instead, we see a pattern. The platforms benefit from stability, the elite creators benefit from tax reform and policy shielding, the consultants benefit from new revenue streams, and together they form a closed loop, one that protects the interests of the most successful players, while using the language of advocacy to mask its true function. This is what political scientists often call elite capture, where movements that start out with populist or democratic energy slowly become dominated by the very institutions they were meant to challenge. And in the case of the Creator Economy Caucus, that shift appears to have happened from day one. There's a word for a system like this, where influence is centralized, outcomes are predictable, and policy is shaped to serve a powerful few while speaking on behalf of the many. It's not democracy, it's not community, and it certainly isn't grassroots. It's oligarchy. If you skim through the official language coming out of the Creator Economy Caucus, 3 core goals are repeated over and over again: tax classification reform, algorithmic transparency, and business recognition for creators. On the surface, all of that does sound fantastic. It suggests a future where creators are finally acknowledged as real workers, with proper legal protections, predictable income, and say in the systems that govern their livelihoods. But once you dig into the specifics, and more importantly, who stands to benefit, a very different picture emerges. Let's start with tax classification. The caucus has positioned this as a way to help creators navigate the complexities of self-employment. But let's be honest, this isn't really about helping the average person scraping by on affiliate links and £100 a month from Ko-fi. It's about optimizing the tax burdens of those operating at MatPat's level, creators with production companies, full-time staff, and multiple income streams from branded partnerships, platform revenue splits, and product licensing. These are the types of creators who already use accountants, lawyers, and consultants to minimize their liabilities. A formal reclassification of creators as small business entities doesn't just legitimize their work, it potentially unlocks deductions, structures, and tax strategies that can reduce their overall burden significantly. It also helps the platforms' revenue-sharing models become easier to manage when the creators involved are formally registered businesses, not random individuals uploading content from their bedroom. It brings the ecosystem into alignment with how corporations like YouTube and Patreon already operate. Meanwhile, what does your average creator get from all of this? Confusion. More paperwork, possibly a few vague benefits that require them to jump through legal hoops just to access the most basic protections like income stability or healthcare support. And that's assuming they can even qualify. Then there's the push for algorithmic transparency, which again sounds like progress. Finally, someone in Congress is going to look into how the sausage gets made at YouTube, right? Well, not quite, because the version of transparency platforms that are willing to entertain isn't the kind that fixes discrimination, bias, or inconsistency. It's the kind that outlines their general intentions without offering any real accountability. It's the sort of language that reassures investors and regulators that they're being proactive while continuing to run opaque, ever-shifting systems that punish small creators and independent educators without explanation. And finally, we have business recognition. This is where the Caucus wants creators to be treated more like entrepreneurs, a concept that certainly has some merit after all. Many creators are building businesses. But again, look at who actually benefits. The creators who already have managers, editors, merch lines, and brand deals will be the first to reap the rewards. Business recognition helps them with contract enforcement, legal protection, and investment opportunities. It unlocks a tier of access and legitimacy they can use to expand even further. But what about creators who work alone? The creators who don't have formalized support structures or scalable models. For them, this kind of recognition doesn't shield them. It doesn't stop advertisers from blacklisting certain topics. It doesn't ensure fair treatment by platforms. It just adds more layers of formality that can become barriers instead of gateways. The reality is, being a recognized business doesn't protect you if the system still doesn't value your content or your community. So yes, the Caucus talks a big game about leveling the playing field, but every single policy proposal we've seen so far benefits the players who were already winning. It's not about empowerment, it's about optimization for the platforms, for the elite, and for the consultants standing just off camera with their next round of talking points. At this point in the story, the pattern is clear, and if you've been around long enough to witness the inner workings of the gaming industry or the tech world at large, you've probably seen this playbook before. It always starts with something that sounds noble: protect the creators, empower the community, fix the system. But behind the scenes, what we often see is a carefully staged operation, one where corporate interests quietly embed themselves into grassroots movements, gain influence through key appointments, and then steer the narrative in a direction that benefits them and not the people they claim to support. As for MatPat himself, while he might appear to be the face of the everyman creator, he's no longer financially or structurally aligned with struggling content makers. His wealth, earned through massive platform success and the sale of theorist media, and when your livelihood is no longer tied to the whims of the platform, but instead to your ability to maintain influence over that platform, your incentives change dramatically. Put all of this together with the likes of YouTube and Patreon, and what you get is what researchers call coalition infiltration, a technique where dominant players insert themselves into a movement just early enough to influence its goals, co-opt its branding, and drown out voices that might ask harder questions. We've seen this before. In gaming, the Entertainment Software Association claims to represent players and developers, but overwhelmingly acts in the interests of major publishers like EA, Activision, and Ubisoft. Their lobbying in the US has long focused on weakening consumer protections while presenting themselves as the champions of digital rights. We've also seen it in tech. Time and time again, platform money shapes legislation, from Section 230 debates to copyright reform, by stacking working groups of ex-staffers, policy graduates, and former regulators. The result? Laws that sound like consumer advocacy but are written in ways that favour the status quo. And now we might be seeing it unfold in the creator economy, dressed up in friendlier packaging. Because when YouTube, Patreon and multi-millionaire creators all sit at the same table to write the rules for everyone else, and no one seems to notice the missing seats for small creators, what you're witnessing isn't democracy, it's not activism, and is certainly not representation. It's capture, corporate capture, and it's happening in real time. So where does all of this leave us? The idea of a creator economy caucus isn't inherently bad. In fact, the goals it claims to pursue, fairer tax classification, platform transparency, and business recognition, are long overdue. Creators do deserve legal recognition. We do need better protection. And yes, it's about time Congress started paying attention to the growing creative labour force behind digital media. But good ideas mean very little when the structure delivering them is opaque, exclusionary, and quietly guided by corporate hands. If this caucus is serious, then the first thing it needs to deliver is transparency, not just in name, but in practice. That means clear disclosure of funding sources, a full public list of its congressional members, and honest accounting of who's helping shape its policies behind closed doors. It's not enough to say, we're helping creators, if the only people in the room are those who have already won. The creator economy is diverse, fragile, and still in its infancy. And if we allow the rules to be written solely by those with the most power, we'll be locking in inequality for an entire generation of content makers. So yes, support the goals, support better policy, but don't blindly support the structure, because this one, as it currently stands, serves the interests of a very select few. If they really want to help, they need to open the doors, show us the ledgers, and bring more voices to the table, because otherwise what we're looking at isn't reform, it's theatre, and not the kind MatPat put on as a theatre kid, but the kind where the script's already been written and the audience is just expected to clap. So keep your eyes open, follow the people, follow the money, and remember, even the most well-intentioned advocacy, when placed in the wrong hands, can quietly transform into yet another tool for oligarchic control. But hey, that's just a theory, a game theory. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, right now you can grab 43% off Expedition 33, 37% off Black Myth Wukong, 29% off Stellar Blade, and 32% off the stunning Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, all through my discount links below. Thousands of retro and modern games are currently up to 90% off. So whether you're curating your forever library or panic buying before another purge, don't pay full price like a muppet. Click the pinned comment, build your collection, and enjoy the games you actually want while you still can. Or if you want to support my work in a more personal way, then access my cosplay library and more over on Patreon.